At the top tonight, we reported earlier that the new case count for Nueces County would not be posted today. That information was actually posted online this afternoon by the Texas Department of Health and Human Services, saying there was a backlog and that the numbers needed to be checked and confirmed first. However, the new coronavirus numbers did in fact come down a short time later from the City County Health District, and we do want to show them to you now as part of tonight's top story. The total number of coronavirus cases across the coastal bend now tops 19,000. That includes more than 15,000 in Nueces County. That's the total number since March. The county reporting 508 new positive tests for today. 7 new COVID-related deaths were reported today. Of those patients, 5 were men, 12 were women, ranging in age, 5 were men, 2 were women, ranging in age from 60 to 90 years old, a total of 7 today. And that brings the death toll in the county up to 243. And the number of people hospitalized right now is at 278. That's down a bit, going down pretty steadily there, with 111 of them in the ICU. Now, these numbers are updated every day on our website as they come into us, so feel free to check that out for yourself at KIIITV.com. Well, health experts are now saying the number of Texans being tested for coronavirus has fallen sharply in recent weeks. They're calling it perhaps a worrisome trend, in as much as schools are beginning to reopen in many places. Back in the first week of August, an average of about 36,000 tests were administered in the state of Texas each day. That's a drop of more than 40%, though, from the previous 2 weeks. Experts say the decline in testing may be driven in part by a drop in demand. And disturbing new findings from a just-released study by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Children's Hospital Association. Researchers discovered a 40% increase in child coronavirus cases across the country. And in fact, last week we reported that the number of cases here in Nueces County involving children under the age of 24 months had doubled since March of this year, standing at 160 cases locally. And while those numbers are scary, local infectious disease specialist Dr. Jaime Fergie at Driscoll Children's Hospital says it's all relative. In fact, he says cases at Driscoll are comparatively low.
You know, we actually have very few patients. In general, actually, this COVID thing have produced a decreasing number of hospitalizations in general for us. So we are not seeing, and I think this is a critically important thing for the community, we're not seeing, you know, a large number of children coming to the hospital sick with COVID. We're not. That is not happening.
Dr. Jaime Fergie. Now, when it comes to getting children back in the classroom later this year, Dr. Fergie says schools should be able to open safely if everyone follows the established safety guidelines.